This is the foundations of GS4 Marathon 2026. This is the last and fifth video of this GS4 Marathon 2026. In this video, we are going to discuss unit number 2, unit number 3, unit number 4, and unit number 5. Actually, what are those units? The unit number 2 is ethics and human interface. This is the last of the 5, and it is the one people are most tempted to skip. I would not. And here is the number that should stop you. These 4 units are about a third of section A. Ethics and human interface with human values is about a fifth on its own. Attitude and emotional intelligence add roughly 1.7. Individually, they are two lightest blocks in this paper. Together, they are a third of it, and they are the block most people leave until last or never reach. Three things carry forward. If you have arrived here first, take these and you can follow everything ahead. What are the carry forward things? The first one is the 4 frames from video number 1. Those are quotation, enumerate and justify, distinguish and design. Every unit here ends by naming which frame its questions have historically demanded. The second one is the precision rule from video number 2. What are the precision rule? What is the precision rule? Integrity, impartiality, objectivity, empathy, and compassion are not interchangeable, and an answer that treats them as synonyms say so on the first line. So this video builds the ideas underneath those words. So, and third one is one pair reused here. Discretion is a judgment inside a power. The rule confers for reasons you can state, and arbitrariness is judgment without the power or with it and without reasons. The difference is not how kind the decision was, and one framing worth restating because these 4 units only make sense inside it. UPSC is not testing 8 separate subjects or 8 separate topics. It is testing one capability, the capacity to make a defensible ethical decision in public life. And the syllabus is simply the order in which that capacity is built. Ethics gives the principles, values explain where the principles come from. Attitude is how they become visible to anyone else. Emotional intelligence is what lets you carry them into a room full of frightened, angry people, which is why the two lightest blocks in the paper taken together and are the heaviest by dependence. Every case study in video number 3 and every worked answer in videos 2 and 4 is running on the concepts in this one. We begin where the syllabus does ethics and the human interface. Actually, what is ethics and what is human interface? So, read the syllabus heading carefully because the second half of it is doing work. UPSC does not write ethics, it writes ethics and human interface. Ethics is never examined in isolation here, it exists only where human beings are deciding something that affects other human beings. That is why this paper almost never asks you what ethics is, and almost always asks what it does in a situation. The working definition to carry ethics is the discipline of deciding what ought to be done when more than one course is possible and each carries a cost. Not knowing what is right, that is the easy part, and most people manage it. That is deciding under pressure, deciding under pressure, with complete information, and being able to say why. Then ethics, morality, law. And why the distinction earn marks? Three words candidates use interchangeably and UPSC does not. So ethics, morality, law. Ethics, morality, law. What each asks, it source, what enforce it. Three words candidates use interchangeably and UPSC does not. This is the thing you have to remember. And the first one is law. Law asks what does the system permit or forbid? But what is the source? The state. Enforced by whom? Sanction. Enforced by which process? Sanction. Then comes to the morality. Morality asks what does my conscience hold to be right? Source what? Upbringing, belief, community. Enforced by guilt, social approval. Comes to ethics. Ethics asks what ought to be done here and can I justify it? What is the source? Reasoned principle and enforced by argument and accountability. Argument and accountability. So the examinal point is not the table. It is what happens when the diverge, and UPSC asked exactly that in 2015. Give an example of an act that is ethically right but not legal, and one that is legally right but not ethical. But not ethical. So, what is that when law and ethics diverge, which asked in 2015? Ethically right, not legal. Ethically right, not legal. A relief officer who releases supplies from a store before the sanction arrives because people are hungry now. Legally right. This is we discussing ethically right, not legal. And again we are going to next thing that is legally right, not ethical. What is that? A firm that pays the statutory minimum wage while designing shifts so that nobody qualifies for the benefits attached to full-time employment. So nothing unlawful has occurred here. What is that I am repeating again? A firm paying statutory minimum wage while designing shifts so nobody qualifies for the benefits of full-time employment. So this is legally right but not ethical. So nothing unlawful has occurred here. Something has plainly gone wrong. And the reason this matters for an administrator stated once. Law cannot anticipate every situation. Many lawful actions are still wrong, and many dilemmas arise precisely because the law offers more than one permissible course. Ethics is what operates in the space rules leave open. Ethics is what operates in the space rules leave open, which is the most of an administrative career. So essence, what is essence? Determinants, essence, determinants, consequences. The syllabus names these three explicitly, so know what each means rather than reciting the words. So what is the essence we are going to discuss? The essence is respect for human dignity. The essence is what ethics is fundamentally about. Underneath every ethical principle sits respect for human dignity. The claim that a person is not merely a means to somebody else's end. Honesty, justice, compassion, and integrity all reduce to that, which is why they hold across cultures that agree on almost nothing else. So, determinants. where a personal's where a person's ethical sense comes from. Family first, then society and community norms. Education, religion, or philosophical belief. Life experience, the professional environment you enter, constitutional values, the role models you happen to have, and the institutions you work inside. Note that the last two are the ones an administration can actually change, which is why answers about improving ethics in the service should concentrate there rather than on exhortation. So comes to next one, consequences. What are the consequences? The part most candidates skip, and it is the easiest to score on. Ethical conduct produces trust, and trust produces predictability, cooperation, and lower transaction costs. A citizen who believes the queue is fair does not need to find someone who knows someone. Unethical conduct does unethical conduct does the reverse, and the damage compounds. Each instance teaches the next person that the honest route does not work until honesty becomes not merely difficult but irrational. That is why institutional decay is fast and institutional repair is slow. Comes to dimensions. What are the dimensions? Six dimensions. And are and dimensions and the worked 2024 question. Ethics operates simultaneously at several levels. And the 2024 paper asked directly, explain the key dimensions of ethics that influence human actions, and discuss how these dimensions shape ethical decision making a professional in a professional context. Dimensions. The dimensions. The six dimensions. Personal, professional, social, organizational, environmental, and global. The dimensions comes to the personal dimensions. The values you hold as an individual. Then comes to professional, the obligations that attach to a role and bind you regardless of personal conviction. These are comes under professional dimensions. Then comes to social, duties owed to the community, especially its weaker members. This is social. Then organizational dimensions, the standards of the institutions you serve, that is comes under organizational dimensions. Environmental, obligations to the natural world and to those who depend on it, that is comes under environmental. And global, responsibilities that cross borders, which is unit 9's subject we discussed. So now the structure that earns marks, and it is short, open by stating that ethics is not one dimensional. It operates across overlapping spheres. A professional must resilience. A professional must reconcile. So list the dimensions with one administrative line each, not a paragraph. Then take one concrete collision and walk it through. A posting where personal loyalty to a former colleague meets professional objectivity, or an approval where organizational targets meet environmental objection. So that single applied paragraph what separates a 6 from a 9. So you have to close on synthesis. An ethical professional reconciles dimensions rather than picking one, and the anchor for that reconciliation in public service is constitutional morality. The reusable frame here is what? The reusable frame define, enumerate, apply one conflict to a real decision. So you have to close on balance. It is, it fits every dimensions, determinants, consequences question this paper has set. So private and public relationships. What are the private and public relationships? Private ethics governs relationships you choose. Private ethics governs relationships, you choose. Family, friendship, community. Public ethics governs duties you assumed with an office. Two overlap comfortably most of the time and collide sharply when they do not, which is the engine of a large fraction of the case studies in unit number 11. The governing asymmetry to state we are going to discuss in private life. Partiality is a virtue. In private life, partiality is a virtue. You are supposed to favor your own child. In public life, the same deposition is a vice, because the office you hold was given to you on the express condition that you would not. So that is why personal life and private ethics is different. Public life and private life is different. So that is not a demand that you stop loving your family. It is a demand that you not spend public authority on them. So next we are moving to universal or contextual. What is universal and what is contextual? The debate UPSC keeps returning to 2013, asked in 2013 and 20 again 2024. So 2013 asked what? Some people feel values keep changing with time and the situation, while others believe there are universal and eternal human values. Give your perception. This is asked in 2013. In 2024 asked what? The concept of just and unjust is contextual. What was just a year back may be unjust today. 11 years apart, the same debate have one position ready and you have answered both. So the position that holds up what? Values are universal at the level of principle and contextual at the level of application. So human dignity is not negotiable. That is the thing. What counts a treating, what counts as treating a person with dignity has changed enormously in what is expected of an employer, in what family may demand of a daughter, in what a state may do to a person in custody. And the argument that settles it, which most candidates miss, that is what? Moral progress requires a standard. Moral progress requires a standard. What is that standard? If everything were genuinely relative to its time, then abolishing untouchability was not an improvement. It was merely a change of fashion. And no one believes that. So the very act of saying an earlier practice was unjust presupposes something that did not change while the practice did. So the honest answer is not values are relative, but our understanding of universal values has deepened, and we mistake that deepening for the values themselves shifting. Values are this the answer that does not score what? Values are relative to the time. There are eternal values and settles it. Either pole asserted with our argument. The position that holds up what? Universal at the level of principle, contextual at the level of application. Human dignity is not negotiable. That is the thing. What counts as treating a person with dignity has changed enormously. Then moral progress requires a standard. If all were relative, abolishing untouchability was a change of fashion, not an improvement. The honest answer is not values are relative, but our understanding of universal values has deepened, and we mistake that deepening for the values themselves shifting. So then give the 2024 stem its due, because it has a serious point. If context matters to justice, then a settled practice deserves a periodic re examination. and that is an administrative duty, not a philosophical luxury. A rule that was fair when written may operate unfairly now because the world around it moved. The officer's obligation is to notice. Then comes to environmental ethics. Prepare it as a core. This is used to be treated as a fringe topic. It is not. This used to be treated as a fringe topic. It is not. It appeared section A in 2015, again in 2024 as global warming and human greed, and again in 2025 as environmental clearance against national security. And it carried two section. It carried to section B, case studies across 2024 and 2025. Prepare it as core. So this is all regarding about environmental ethics. The question the whole field turns on: does nature have value only because human beings need it, or does it have value in itself? Come to anthropocentric, biocentric, and ecocentric. What is anthropocentric? Nature matters because we depend on it. Its strength is that it motivates protection on grounds anyone accepts. Its weakness is that it justifies destroying anything we do not currently need. So comes to biocentric. Living things have value in themselves, not merely as resources. Then comes to ecocentric. The value attaches to the system, not just to its not just to its individual members. A wetland matters as a wetland and not only as a sum of birds. So this is regarding ecocentric. This is regarding nature matters because we spend it, we depends it. This is anthropocentric. Nature matters because we depend on it, motivates protection on grounds anyone accepts, and justifies destroying anything we do not currently need. And next one, biocentric. Biocentric means what? Living things have value in themselves, not merely as resources. Then comes to ecocentric. Ecocentric means what? Value attaches to the system, not just its members. System. A wetland matters as a wetland, not only as a sum of birds. So value attaches to the system. So here is why this is not an academic distinction, and this is the sentence to deploy. What is the sentence we are going to deploy? The view you adopt decides what an impact assessment is permitted to count. If a forest has only instrumental value, the assessment counts timber revenue, downstream water, and displaced livelihoods. If it has intrinsic value, the forest itself enters the calculation as a party rather than as input. So, two officers using the same procedure will reach different answers depending on which they assume, and neither will usually notice they assumed anything. They assumed anything. So, the Indian traditions which are genuinely strong here rather than decorative. The Pancha Mahabhutas, treating earth, water, fire, air, and space as the shared substance of all beings rather than as a stock of materials. Aparigraha in the Jain tradition, restraint in possession, which is a doctrine of sufficiency rather than of accumulation, and is the closest thing in any tradition to a principled answer to consumption. Then come to sacred groves. Sacred groves preserved by custom of centuries without any statutory protection, and the Bishnoi tradition of protection extending to trees and animals to real personal cost. And then deploying one of these is far stronger in an Indian paper than reaching for Western environmental philosopher. So, and the strongest ethical frame available here is intergenerational justice. The people who will bear most of the cost today's decision are not born and cannot be consulted, are not represented in any negotiation, and have no way to hold anyone to account. That is the purest case of power exercised over those who cannot answer back, which is what ethics exist what which is what ethics exists to constraint. Rawls will handles it directly. You are choosing a policy without knowing which generations you will be born into. This is the thing. One more asymmetry for the development. What is the asymmetry here? One more asymmetry for the development versus environment cases. Irreversibility. A road can be built later, a hospital can be relocated, an aquifer that has been drawn down for post an aquifer that has been drawn down past recovery, or an old growth forest cannot be rebuilt at all, where one side a trade-off is reversible and other is not. That asymmetry is itself an ethical argument and belongs in your answer. So what is the irreversibility here we are discussing? A road can be built later, a hospital can be relocated, an aquifer drawn down past recovery, or an old growth forest cannot be rebuilt at all, where one side of a trade off is reversible and the other is not. That asymmetry is itself an ethical argument. So, ethical argument, and it belongs in your answer. So, the digital arena asked in 2025, the digital arena asked in 2025, that is social media. In the present digital age, social media has revolutionized our way of communication and interaction. However, it has raised several ethical issues and challenges. Describe the key ethical dilemmas in this regard. 10 marks 2025, and note it is the same principle in a new arena exactly as the internet question in 2020 and the AI question in 2024 were. So the dilemmas named as collisions rather than as complaints. Free expression against harm. Both claims are real. Expression versus harm. Free expression against harm. Both claims are real. The difficulty is that the harm is diffuse and the speech is specific. So restrictions are always easier to justify against an individual than the harm is to prove. Then comes to anonymity versus accountability or account. Anonymity against accountability. Anonymity protects the whistleblower, the dissenter, and the abuse survivor. The same shield protects the harasser. You cannot remove it for one without removing for the others. Truth against velocity. The architecture rewards what spreads, and what spreads is what provokes. Accuracy is slower than outrage by design, not by accident, which makes this a structural problem rather than a failure of individual users. So, privacy against public interest. Exposure of genuine wrongdoing and the destruction of a private person are performed with the identical mechanism, and the platform cannot tell them apart. And a reputation against process. A person can be tied, a person can be tried, convicted, and punished online in a day with no evidence rule, no defense and no appeal, and no way to restore what was lost if the accusation was false. That's it. Then attention as the extracted resource. The user is not the customer. Naming that once shows you understand why the other five dilemmas are hard to fix from inside the system. So the administrative half is which the question invites and most answers omit. The officer's own use of these platforms announcing enforcement action before an inquiry concludes. So responding to criticism in a personal capacity while holding office, naming an accused person to a public that will not wait for the finding. The state's digital conduct is subject to the same ethics It expected it expects of citizens, and an answer that says so is doing something the others are not. The applied version is the 2023 case in Unit 11. A parent whose son is bullied, who posts a counter video identifying the children responsible. Every dilemma above in that one page. So, what is the Metis 2026 anchor here is due process has an ethical dimension. The Supreme Court's pan India directions on demolition of structures, 13th November 2024, issued under Article 142. What is the procedure? Naming three of these beats describing the ruling in general. Show cause notice, 15 days to reply. Personal hearing, reasoned order, 15 further days before demolition. Videography, a digital portal violation as contempt. A digital portal violation as contempt, personal liability of officials, including restoration at their own cost. So, where it stood in July 2026, the court declined contempt petitions and remitted them to high courts for decision within 4 months. Interim protection continuing, no opinion expressed on the merits. So, how can you deploy on dimensions of ethics, rule of law, or executive discretion? Punitive action outside due process substitutes executive convenience for adjudication and imposes cost on those never accused. And the 2026 line that lifts the answer, a guideline judgment is only as effective as the forum enforcing it. So keep the framing at the level of constitutional principle, due process, separation of powers, shelter under Article 21, not the politics in any individual case. How UPSC has asked this, definitions with application, values and ethics, and why being ethical matters alongside professional competence. 2013 asked what ethics seeks to promote in human life and why it matters more in public administration. This question asked in 2014 and again asked in 2022. The universal versus contextual debate, values changing with time against eternal values. 2013 asked just and unjust as contextual. 2024 question, and then dimensions and determinants, the key dimensions of ethics and how they shape professional decision making. This question asked in 2024. The law ethics boundary, politics and ethics not going together. This asked in 2013. An act ethically right but not legal, and legally right but not ethical. Asked in 2015. Ethics in a live arena, the recurring pattern. The internet instilling values in conflict with the tradition. This asked in 2020. Social media's ethical dilemmas asked in 2025. Environmental ethics asked in 2015. Global warming and human greed asked in 2024, and environmental clearance against national security asked in 2025. The 2021 refugee and non-refoulement question belongs to the same pattern, and Unit 9 answers it as international ethics. So, read the last line and you have this unit's central lesson, that is, the arena changes every few years and the principle does not. Internet, refugees, social media, artificial intelligence, climate, whatever appears in 2026 that nobody prepared for. The frame you have already built will hold, which is precisely why understanding the concept beats memorizing the current example. So the frames in this unit feeds the quotation above all, the 2013 eternal value stem, the 2024 just and unjust stem, and the 2025 social media stem all arrive as statements to be examined rather than topics to be explained. Enumerate and justify carries the dimensions and determinants questions. Design a measure has not yet been set on this block. If it is, it will ask how to strengthen ethics in an institution, and the four carries in Unit 3 are the structure of it. So one line to carry as far as this chapter is concerned, ethics is not about finding easy answers. It is about making a responsible decision when every option carries a cost. Every option carries a cost, and belong and being able to explain afterwards why you choose the one you did. And the next thing, where any of this comes from in the first place, that is human values. Human values. What are the human values, and what is that chapter particularly teaching about? You need to establish what ethics is. The obvious next question is where it comes from. Nobody is born with integrity, empathy, honesty, tolerance, the willingness to be inconvenienced for someone else's benefit. These develop or they do not. So the syllabus moves from ethics to human values, and note that exact wording UPSC uses. Lessons from the lives and teachings of great leaders, reformers, and administrators, and role of family, society, and educational institution in inculcating values. The question underneath the whole unit, how is an ethical public servant actually formed? Not exhorted, formed. What is a value? What a value is, and the distinction that unmarks. So values are enduring principles that guide behavior, choice, and relationship. Unlike rules, they are internal. Unlike laws, they cannot be enforced from outside. Over time, they stop being things you consult and become the things you are, which is what we mean by character. Now, the distinction most candidates never make, and it is worth 2 marks anywhere it appears. A preference. A preference is what you want. A value is what you hold to when holding to it costs you something. Everyone claims to value honesty. The value is only demonstrated at the point where honesty is expensive. Expensive. The test of a value is what you are willing to give up for it, which is why a case study is a better test of values than any declaration could be. And a second gap worth naming, that is between the values a person holds and the values a person enacts. Most people hold values they do not act on, and usually without noticing. This matters administratorily without noticing. Most people. And a second gap worth naming, that is second gap what, between the values a person holds and the values a personal enacts and a person holds. Most people hold values they do not act on, and usually without noticing. This matters administratively. An ethics training program that changes what officers say they value without changing the incentives they face changes nothing. Say that in any question about strengthening values in the service, and you have separated yourself from the answers that recommended more workshops. More workshops. Essence. What sits under all of them? At the heart of every value is respect for human dignity, honesty, compassion, justice, and integrity. All ultimately protect the same thing. The claim that a person has worth that is not a conditional on their usefulness to you. So that is why values survive translation across cultures, and that that agree on almost nothing else. And it is the sentence to open almost any question in this unit. Values are a system, not a list. This is most useful idea in the unit, and almost nobody teaches it. Integrity, honesty, compassion, integrity, honesty, compassion, empathy, tolerance, justice, responsibility, accountability, courage. These are not items to be recited. They constrain one another, and each of them becomes a defect when it operates alone. So values in isolation become their own failure. So compassion without integrity, it becomes favoritism. Integrity without empathy, integrity without empathy becomes rigidity. Justice, justice without compassion, it becomes insensitivity. Courage without judgment, it becomes recklessness. Loyalty in without independence, complicity. Efficiency without conscience, it becomes what? Harm and delivered faster. So read the column downwards and you have the diagnosis of most administrative failure. The officer who lets a deserving case through because he was moved by it, and the next one through because he knew the applicant, has traveled from compassion to favoritism without ever making a decision he would call wrong. An ethical administration does not maximize one value. He balances several and knows which one he is currently at risk of overweighting. So, how values develop? The four carriers. The syllabus names three, add the fourth because it is the one an administration can factually actually operate it. So family gives the earliest sense of right and wrong, largely by demonstration rather than instruction. A child learns what is acceptable by watching what is done, not by hearing what is said. Society reinforms the through Society reinforms through custom, community expectation and approval, and it transmits undesirable values as efficiency as desirable one, which is the point of 2016 question was making about attitudes observed unconsciously. Educational institutions had what family society cannot: critical thinking, constitutional values, respect for diversity, and the experience of cooperating with people unlike oneself. The last one is the part of a syllabus cannot deliver and a classroom can. So institutions and the workplace. The fourth carrier, the fourth carrier, and the one this paper cares about most. A service teaches value through what it rewards, what it tolerates, and what happens to the officer who objects. Every introduction module in the country is overweighted by the first senior or officer watches get away with something. Value formation is continuous, not a stage that completes. That is what makes the fourth carrier decisive, is the only one still operating on a serving officer. So comes to the worked example, the four carrier engine. The corruption is the manifest of the failure of core values in the society. In your opinion, what measures can be adopted to uplift the core values in the society, asked in 2023? What are the four carriers here? How values develop in general? First one is family, second one is society, third one is education, and fourth one is institutions and workplaces. These are four carriers. So this is the example. Corruption is the manifestation of the failure of core values, asked in 2023. This looks like a corruption question. It is a values question, and answering it as a corruption question is the standard mistake. Introduction: accept the premise quickly. Introduction: accept the premise quickly. Corruption is not merely a legal failure but a value failure, because enforcement can only reach what it detects, and most transactions are never detected. Then the signal: you will answer the constructive half. How values are rebuilt, not how corruption is punished. Then diagnosis briefly. Two lines. No more. Erosion of social disapproval so that corruption becomes an ordinary cost rather than a disgrace. Transactional education that certifies without farming. Weaker inverted role models, and normalization where the honest person is regarded as naive rather than admirable. Then the measures organized by the four carriers. This structure is the reusable engine, family, family, early moral instruction, and more importantly, lived example. Since children learn by observation, comes to education, value-based curriculum and experiential rather than didactic methods. This is where the 2020 new education policy question gets reused. Comes to society part, restoring social disapproval, celebrating integrity publicly, recognizing honest officers in ways that are visible. Then comes to institutions, codes of ethics, transparency, protection for those who refuse, and leadership that visible models that it demands. And comes to the conclusion, close on values over enforcement. The close chain, values prevent corruption more durably than punishment does, because law restrains the hand while values restrain the will. And a state that must detect every transaction has already lost. Comes to the reusable frame, accept to premise, then diagnose the value. What is the reusable frame? I am repeating again, accept this frame, accept the premise, then diagnose the value failure briefly, then rebuild through family, education, society, institutions, then close and values over enforcement. It answers every how do we strengthen values question this paper has set, and therefore have been several. So lessons from leaders and reforms and administrators. The syllabus names three categories deliberately, and candidates usually cover only the first. Lessons from leaders, reforms, and administrators. The instruction is not to memorize biographies. It is to know which value each figure represents and how it transforms to administration. One line each applied. Comes to the leaders part. Gandhi, the inseparability of means and ends and trusteeship of power. Comes to Ambedkar, constitutional morality and social justice as the precondition of real liberty rather than its reward. Then Patel, decisiveness and the willingness to carry an unpopular necessity. Then come to Lal Bahadur Shastri, integrity and simplicity, and the idea that accountability includes accepting consequences you are not personally at fault for. Comes to Nehru, institution building and scientific temper. Comes to reformers, and this is the category most often skipped. Note the UPSC asked about Savitri Bai Phule directly in 2020. Savitri Bai and Jyoti Rao Phule, education as the instrument of emancipation, and the insight that a group excluded from literacy cannot claim any other rights effectively. Raja Ram Mohan Rai reform argued from within a tradition rather than against it, which is the harder and more durable route. Then comes to Vivekananda, service as the recognition of equal worth. Then each of these is directly usable in questions social justice, gender, and the role of education. Then comes to administrators. E. Sridharan is the standing example. Delivery on schedule combined with refusal to compromise on process and a demonstrated culture of accountability within a public organization. The value he represents is the one he's won this paper most needs to see named. Competence is itself an ethical obligation, because an officer who cannot deliver has failed the citizen as surely as one who would not. Then comes to deploy these one sentence and one application. A paragraph of biography in a 150 word answer is a paragraph you did not spend on the question. So two questions that recur in this unit: education and values 2020. Education and values 2020. Education is not an injunction. It is an effective and pervasive tool for all round development of an individual and social transformation. Examine the national education policy in light of it. Two questions recur in this unit: education and values 2020. Education is not injunction; it is an effective and pervasive tool for all-round development of an individual and social transformation. Examine the national education policy in light of it. The hinge is the word injunction. That the claim is that values cannot be commanded into existence; they have to be formed. So the answer is about method, not content. Experiential and play-based learning at the foundational stage, critical thinking rather than recall, multidisciplinary exposure, mother tongue instruction, reducing the exclusion that alienates a child early, and continuous assessment rather than a single high stakes examination. And the honest limit here is policy changes what schools are asked to do. It does not itself change teacher capacity, classroom reality, or the incentives of a coaching driven system. Values and National Power 2020 asked, discuss the role of ethics and values is in changing human capital, soft power, and social harmony. The moves is to show that each of these three depends on something value, supply, and money cannot buy. So, human capital trust lowers the cost of every transaction, and a workforce that cannot rely on contracts or institutions underperform its education. So, soft power credibility is the whole of it. A country is admired for what a visible lead practices, not what is professes. So, which is why soft power cannot be manufactured by communication. Comes to social harmony, tolerance and equal dignity are not sentiments here but preconditions of a functioning state, because a society that must police its own fractures has less capacity of everything else. Values in administration, three lines that to do a lot of work. In conclusions, authority without values become arbitrary. Power without integrity becomes corruption. Efficiency without compassion becomes indifference, and indifference delivered efficiently is worse than incompetence because it reaches more people. So what values what values do in an officer? They decide the cases the rules do not cover. They determine what you do when nobody will ever know, and they set what your subordinate conclude is acceptable. That last one is the mechanism by which one officers values become an institution's culture, and it works identically in both directions. Comes to the Metis 2026 anchor, values formed rather than instructed. The national education policy's play-based activity-led approach at the foundational stage deploy on the role of education institutions in inculcating values. Value formation is experimental. Value formation is experiential, not the injection of rules. Play, story, group activity. Play, story, and group activity at the foundational stage build empathy, cooperation, and respect for difference before formal instruction begins, illustrating how education forms values, not merely asserting that it should. Then comes to the side the approach, not a product name. The pedagogy is what carries the argument, and a named kit that has since been renamed costs you more than it ends. Then how UPSC asked this, the nature of values. The good of an individual is contained in the good of all. This question asked in 2013. Social values against economic values in inclusive growth asked in 2015. Without shared moral values, neither law nor democratic government nor the market economy functions properly asked in 2017. The crisis of ethical values traced to a narrow perception of the good life asked in 2017. Their source and formation. The new education policy question 2020, values in comprehensive national power 2020, corruption as the failure of core values and how to uplift them asked in 2023, reformers and social change, the main factors responsible for gender inequality in India, and the contribution of Savitri by Pule asked in 2020, and in quotation form, which is where this unit most often appears, the strength of a society is not its laws, but in morality of its people. Vivekananda asked in 2025 worked in full as the demonstration in Unit 1. Note that this is the 2023 corruption question and the 2017 shared values question are all making the same claim, values as the invincible foundation beneath law and economy. And one position answers all three, provided it non-answered one. One position answers all three, provided it is the non-answered one. The limit from Unit 1 still stands. Law is the floor and morality is the ceiling. And an answer saying only that morality matters more than law has forgotten who law exists to protect. The frames this unit feeds. The quotation above all, the 2013 good of all line, good all, good of all line, both 2017 stems and the 2025 Vivekananda quotation all arrive at statements to be decoded rather than topics to be explained. And a design measure, and a design a measure, which is what the 2023 what measures can be adopted question actually is, and which is the four carrier engine above answers directly. So what is the line to carry as far as this chapter is concerned, or from this chapter? Ethics tell us what ought to be done. Values explain why we choose to do it when nothing compels us. Without values, ethics is a produce. Without values, ethics is a procedure. With them, with them it becomes character, and character is the only part of an officer that cannot be transferred, audited, or taken away. So I am repeating again. Ethics tells us what ought to be done. Values explain why choose to do it when nothing compels us. Without values, ethics is a procedure. With them, it becomes a character. And character is the only part of an officer that cannot be transferred, audited, or taken away. Next, next, how any of this becomes visible to anyone else? That is attitude. That is attitude. The unit 4 is attitude. What is attitude actually? We discussed it till now, ethics and values. Then we are moving to attitude. Values live inside a person. Attitude is how they become visible to everyone else. Two officers with identical training, identical rules, and identical files can deliver entirely different public service. And the difference is usually not competence, it is a disposition. It is a disposition. What is the disposition? Disposition. What is definition? The definition is an attitude is a learned tendency to think, feel, and behave in a particular way toward a person or group, object, or issue. Learned is the important word. It means attitudes are acquired and therefore that they can change, which is what makes the second half of this unit administratively useful. The distinction that prevents the commonest error in this block. Attitude and emotional intelligence are frequently set in the same section of the paper, and candidates routinely blur them. They are not the same thing. An attitude is a disposition toward an object toward a community, a scheme, a category of applicant. Comes to emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence, which is unit 5, is a capability, the ability to recognize and manage emotion, yours and other people's. You can have high emotional intelligence and a deeply prejudiced attitude. Skilled manipulators usually do. You can have high emotional intelligence and a deeply prejudiced attitude. Skilled manipulator usually do. The structure here is three components. What are the three components? Cognitive, affective, behavioral. Cognitive, what I believe, transparency improves governance. Affective, what I feel, discomfort when a file is hidden. Behavioral, what I do, publishing the tender evaluation. Use this skeleton whenever a question asks how an attitude formed or how it should be changed. It is the fastest structure in the paper. Three components, one line each, then the application. So the attitude behavior gap and why it matters more than the components. Mm. The attitude behavior gap and why it matters more than the components. Here is the thing most preparation gets wrong. It teaches that attitude determines behavior. It does not. Stated attitudes predict actual behavior surprising poorly, and the gap between them is where most well designed government campaigns fail. Why the gap exists? Situational pressure overrides disposition. A person who believes in queuing will jump one when everyone else is. Competing attitudes pull against each other. Social norms outweigh private conviction because people are more afraid of looking odd than of being wrong, and opportunity may simply be absent. You cannot act an attitude towards waste segregation if there is one bin. So the administrative consequences, and this is the sentence to deploy a campaign that changes what people believe without changing what is possible, changes very little. So sanitation behavior shifted where facilities were built alongside the messaging, not where the messaging traveled alone. Persuasion and provision have to move together. So how attitude actually change? Three levels. Level one, argument and information. Argument and information works, but only where the audience is motivated to think about the issue, where they are not information slides off, and the message is judged by its source rather than its content. This is why the same fact from a trusted local figure lands and from a poster does not. The lever 2, that is social norms, and this is the strongest and cheapest. People do what they believe others like them are doing. Note the difference between telling someone what they should do and telling them what others already do. Segregate your waste is an instruction. Most households on the street already segregate is a norm, and the second changes behavior where the first does not. Where the desired behavior is rare, do not publicize how rare it is. You will entrench it. So level 3, structure. Make the desired behavior the default, the easy option, or the visible one. Most of what looks like attitude change a successful program is actually the removal of friction. And the counterintuitive finding worth carrying because it reverses how most policy is designed. Attitude Attitudes often follow behavior rather than precede it. People who are produced, People who are induced to act in a particular way tend to acquire attitudes consistent with the action because holding the opposite becomes uncomfortable. Uncomfortable attitudes follow behavior. You do not always have the win the argument first. Change what people do, make it easy and normal, and the belief frequently follows because holding the opposite becomes uncomfortable. Administratively, that means you do not always have to win the argument first. Change what people do, make it easy and normal, and the belief frequently follows. Prejudice and the 2014 caste question. Prejudice and 2014 caste question. UPSC asked what factors shape attitudes towards social problems and why sharply contrasting attitudes about the caste system coexist in the same society. So prejudice is an attitude. So the whole apparatus above applies, but there is one specific finding worth knowing. What is that? Contact reduces prejudice, but only under conditions. Simply putting groups near one another does not work and can worsen matters. It works where the contact involves equal status in the situation, a shared goal that requires cooperation and support from the institutions or authority overseeing it. That is a precise answer to how do we change such attitudes, and it explains why common school, a mixed work team, or joint self-help group changes attitudes when a proximity-based housing policy alone does not. And why contrasting attitude exists? Because the carriers point different away because carriers point different ways. Family and inherited custom transmit one set, education constitutional exposure, urban anonymity and economic mobility transmit another. A single person often holds both, deploying one in public and the other at home. So, which is the honest observation the question is inviting? And a few candidates makes it. Comes to moral, political attitudes. Moral attitudes concern right and wrong. Political attitudes concerns authority, liberty, equality, and the state. For a civil servant, that requirement is precise and worth stating carefully. You hold political views as a citizen, and you are entitled to. The professional obligation is that they do not shape official conduct, that the scheme is implemented identically whichever party designed it, and that the files reads the file reads the same regardless of who is asking. The distinction is between holding and acting on. An answer demanding that officers have no political opinions is asking for something neither possible nor necessary. An answer demanding that those opinions have no trace in the record is asking the right thing. What is the worked example? The 2022 question. Same rules question. The rules and regulations provided to all the civil servants are same. Yet there is difference in the performance. Positive minded officers are able to interpret the rules and regulations in favor of the case and achieving success. Whereas negative minded officers are unable to achieve goals by interpreting the same rules and regulations against the case. So discuss with illustrations. Discuss with illustrations. The cleanest attitude shapes governance question UPSC has set. Comes to introduction. Introduction. What is the introduction? State the paradox directly in identical rules, divergent outcomes, and locate the cause where the question does, not in the rule book but in the interpretive disposition. The next one, body. On the three components, a positive cognitive frame reads rules as enabling. They exist to accomplish something that produces positive effect. Ownership willingness, which produces constructive behavior. Solution finding within the rule. The negative officer runs the same machinery in reverse. Rules as protection against blame, anxiety about exposure, and refusal as the safest act available. Then illustrate, and this is non-negotiable in this question, and comes to the positive. One positive, an officer who needs a relaxation clause, the rule already contains a clear stuck welfare benefit. And one negative here is an officer who says the rules do not permit it without having checked whether they forbid it or not, which is usually not a binding about the rules but a decision not to look. The caveat, the caveat must be there. Positive interpretation operates within law, not around it. The distinction from Unit 7 is exactly this. Discretion is judgment inside a power. The rule confers for reasons you can state. Arbitrariness is judgment without one. A positive officer who bends a rule has not demonstrated a better attitude. He has demonstrated a different failure. Comes to conclusion part. Since no rule book can detail enough to cover every case, governance quality ultimately rests on the disposition of the person applying it, which makes attitude a legitimate object of training, posting, and leadership rather than a private matter. Comes to reusable frame, state the paradox, state the paradox, then run it through think, feel, act, then one positive and one negative illustration, then the within the law caveat, then conclusion or close on cultivating attitude institutionally. So then attitude in administration, knowledge makes knowledge makes an officer competent, attitude makes an officer effective. Responsiveness, empathy, impartiality, professionalism, courtesy, courtesy a citizen encountering the state experiences these long before they experience any policy. Comes to public trust. Public trust is built at counters, not in cabinets. And the institutional point that belongs in every conclusion here, attitude is not merely a personal trait to be praised or lamented. It is produced by what the institution rewards. An organization that punishes error and never rewards initiative will manufacture negative minded officers out of perfectly ordinary people and will then complain about their attitude. Then we are moving to the Metis anchor, persuasion, ownership, and a norm you can point at. Then rooftop solar under PM Suryagar, Mufti Bijli Yojana launched Feb 2024, crossed 50 lakh beneficiaries households by early August 2026, with installation rates of roughly threefold in 9 months, and subsidy paid by direct transfers. The figure that carries the argument, what is that the figure carries that argument? And 19 lakh households now report zero electricity bills, and more than 12 lakh have earned money selling surplus power back to the grid. So the reframe from the recipient of subsidized power to product power to subsidize power to producer of it is not a rhetorical claim. 12 lakh households are being paid. Attitude change through ownership. Attitude changed through ownership rather than persuasion. Plus visible peer adoption doing the work of a descriptive norm. Comes to balance part. You have to balance it. The scheme began slowly and its target was widely doubted in 2025 before this acceleration. How UPSC has asked this formation and change. What factors affected attitude formation towards social problems and contrasting attitudes about caste? This question asked in 2014. Attitudes acquired unconsciously from family and surroundings. and how undesirable ones can be changed. This question asked in 2016. How to build a sustainable attitude for a public servant? This question asked in 2021. Attitude and administration. Bureaucratic against democratic attitude with merits and demerits asked in 2015. Positive attitude under extreme stress asked in 2020. The same rules, different performance question asked in 2022. Social influence and persuasion. How this contributed to Swachh Bharat Abhiyan asked in 2016. And note that in 13 years, this is the only question on a syllabus phrase UPSC explicitly names, which makes it under asked rather than unimportant. And in a quotation form, the greatest discovery of my generation is that a human being can alter his life by altering his attitudes. William James asked in 2025 a quotation question that is really an attitude question, answered within the frame from unit 1 and the content from this one. The frames this unit feeds distinguish above all. The 2015 bureaucratic versus democratic pair is one of the 8, and it is the only one this block has produced. So run it through the 4 moves rather than writing 2 definitions. So design a measure for 2016 and 2021, which both ask how an attitude is to be changed or built rather than what it is. And the quotation for 2025 and for anything that arrives as a statement about disposition. So comes to the closing part, that is chain to carry from this chapter. Values shape attitude. Attitude shapes behavior. Behavior shapes governance. Value to governance. Value shapes what? Value shapes what? Attitude. Attitude shapes behavior. Behavior shapes governance. But hold the second link loosely. Attitude influences behavior rather than determining it, and the gap between the two is where most policy either succeeds or fails. So change the belief and you may change nothing. Change the belief, the norm and the opportunity together, and behavior moves. Then comes to the next part, that is the capability that decides whether any of this survives contact with a frightened, angry room. That is emotional intelligence. That is emotional intelligence. What is emotional intelligence? Actually, a fair question first. Why is a psychology topic sitting in the ethics syllabus? The answer is that governance is not administration of files. It is administration of people, and the people under stress do not behave the way a policy assumed they would. A technically brilliant officer who cannot read a room will lose control of a situation that a less clever one would have held. A technically brilliant officer who cannot read a room will lose control of a situation that a less clever one would have held. So, comes to the definition. What is the definition? Emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize, understand, manage, and use emotion, your own and other people's, so that reason and a feeling both inform a decision instead of one overriding the other. So, what is the emotional intelligence? I am repeating again, that is emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize, understand, manage, and use emotion, your own and other people's, so that reason and feeling both inform a decision instead of one overriding the other. So what is emotional intelligence is not, it is not niceness, it is not agreeableness, it is not emotional expressiveness. What emotional intelligence is not? Three misreadings and each cost marks. It is not niceness. It is not niceness. An emotionally intelligent officer can refuse a request, decline a promotion recommendation, or tell a family that missing person is dead, and can do all three without pretending otherwise. So emotional intelligence governs how a hard thing is done. It is not agreeableness. Reading a room accurately often tells you the room is wrong. The capability is accuracy about emotional states plus regulation, not a disposition to please. And it is not emotional expressiveness. It is not emotional expressiveness. A person who displays feeling readily may have very little control over it, which is the which is the opposite of the capability being described. Self regulation is half the definition. Then what are the five components with administrative content? What are the five components? The first component is self awareness, self regulation, motivation and empathy, social skills. So comes to Goleman's model. Note that other models divide it differently. The first thing is self awareness, knowing your own emotions as they occur and knowing your biases and limits. Administratively, the operative form is narrower and more useful. Noticing when emotion is influencing a judgment you are about to record as reasoned. The officer who is irritated by an applicant and then finds a procedural reason to reject him has failed at self awareness, not at procedure. Self awareness is what? Noticing when emotion is shaping a judgment you are about to record as reason. The officer who dislikes an applicant and finds a reason. Then comes to self regulation, managing impulse, staying composed under provocation, not relaying to the email at 11 at night, not replying. Self regulation, what? Managing impulse, staying composed under provocation, not replying to the email at 11 at night. In administration, this is mostly the ability to insert a delay between feeling and acting, which is why the standing advice about sleeping on angry decision is a genuine technique rather than a platitude. So comes to the motivation and empathy. What is the motivation here? Sustaining commitment. Sustaining commitment to the sustaining commitment to the purpose of the work when the external rewards are absent. Within the public service, they frequently are. This is the component that decides whether an officer is still doing this job properly in year 15. In a posting, nobody notices. What is the motivation? Sustaining commitment to the purpose of the work when the external rewards are absent, which in public service they frequently are. This is the component that decides whether an officer is still doing the job properly in year 15. In a posting nobody notices. Then comes to empathy. What is the empathy? Understanding another person's emotion and their perspective. So you have to note carefully. Understanding, not agreeing. You can fully grasp why a protesting crowd feels betrayed and still be obliged to hold the line. Empathy tells you what they will do next and what will de-escalate it, which is why it is an operational capability and not a soft one. Then comes to social skills. Social skills, building trust, communicating, resolving conflict, leading a team through something difficult. The measurable form, whether people bring you bad news early, an officer whose subordinates conceal problems until they are unfixable has social skills failure. Whatever else is going well. Empathy and sympathy, a distinction worth 2 marks anywhere. Sympathy is feeling for someone, empathy is feeling with them. Sympathy looks across a distance and is compatible with condescension condescension. What is empathy and what is sympathy? Sympathy looks across empathy and sympathy. Empathy and sympathy, a distinction worth 2 marks anywhere. Sympathy is feeling for someone. Empathy is feeling with them. Sympathy looks across a distance and is compatible with condescension. Condescension. It can even require the distance because pity needs someone below you direct it at. Empathy requires you to occupy their standpoint, which is harder and produces different action. The administrative consequence is concrete. Sympathy produces charity, a relief camp, a distribution, a gesture. Empathy produces design, a form the applicant can actually fill, an office hour a daily wage worker can actually attend, a queue that does not require standing for 4 hours. Sympathy asks what we can give them. Empathy asks what makes this hard for them, and then removes it. And compassion from unit 7 completes the sequence. Empathy plus the motivation to act. Empathy plus motivation to act. Understanding without action is a private virtue and does nothing for anyone. Can it be learned? This 2020 question. The honest answer is yes. Unevenly, and the answer that score says which parts. Self-awareness and self-regulation respond well to structured feedback and deliberate practice. Empathy responds to exposure and perspective taking. Field postings, direct contact with beneficiaries, rotation through service delivery roles. Social skills respond to training to the in the ordinary way. What changes slowly is the underlying temperament, and it more honest to say so than to claim anyone can be remade. The administrative reforms, multi-source feedback that includes subordinates rather than only superiors, structured reflection after difficult episodes, mentoring and mandatory field exposure early in a career before habits harden. And the limit worth naming here is which links unit 3, training that teaches the vocabulary without the practice produces officers who can name the 5 components and cannot use one of them. The gap between held and enacted applies here exactly as it does to values. Emotional intelligence and ethics, the critical run. This is the most important idea in the unit and the one the 2021 question was built to test. Emotional intelligence is a capability, and capabilities are morally neutral. A skilled manipulator has high emotional intelligence. Reading what a person fears and needs is precisely how you exploit them. The confidence trickster, the confidence trickster is not deficient in empathy. He is unusually good at it. Worse and more relevant to an officer, emotional intelligence can rationalize a compromise. The same self awareness that identifies your discomfort can be used to manage the discomfort away rather than to act on what caused it. Talking yourself calmly into the easy option is an achievement of emotional regulation, and it is exactly the wrong achievement. So, the relationship to the state. So, ethics decides what is right. Ethics decides what is right. Emotional intelligence decides how wisely and humanly it is carried out. Values must lead. Emotional intelligence executes, reverse the order, and you get a person who handles every situation smoothly and stands for nothing. The worked example is 2021 crisis of conscience question. In case of a crisis of conscience, does emotional intelligence help to overcome the same without compromising the ethical or moral standard that you are likely to know, are likely to follow. Critically examine. Critically examine. The question is introduction. Introduction for this question, critically examine 2021 crisis of conscience. Define both terms separately because the trap is treating them as the same thing. A crisis of conscience is an inner conflict between official duty and personal moral conviction. Emotional intelligence is a capability. Then state your thesis immediately. It aids the resolution but cannot substitute for the ethical standard. Then comes to body. First half, how it helps using the five components and as instant structure. Self-awareness identifies which emotion is clouding the judgment. Fear of consequence of disguises itself as prudence. Then comes to self-regulation prevents the rash resignation or the angry confrontation. Empathy weights the human cost on all sides, including the side you are inclined to dismiss. Then social skills determine whether the decision can be carried throughout the institution without unnecessary damage. Then comes to body second half, that is the critical turn, which is what critically examine is asking for. Emotional intelligence is neutral. It can smooth the path to the wrong decision as easily as the right one, and it is particularly good at making compromises feel like maturity. Then without a firm value anchor, high emotional intelligence produces a very comfortable capitulation. Then comes to resolve. Necessary, not necessary, but not sufficient. The stand comes from values and conscience. Emotional intelligence determines the cost at which is carried out, whether you keep the team, whether the institution survives the decision, whether the person on the other side is left with their dignity. Then comes to conclusion. Values decide that is right. Emotional intelligence decides how to do right under pressure. A civil servant needs both and needs them in that order. Comes to reusable frame. First one, define both terms separately. Show how the five components help. The critical turn, neutral tool can rationalize, resolve as necessary, not sufficient. Comes to close on values based. Values lead. Close on values lead. Comes to EQ against IQ. This question asked in 2023. What really matters for success, character, happiness, and lifelong achievement is a definite set of emotional skills. Your EQ, emotional quotient, not just purely cognitive abilities measured by conventional IQ tests. Do you agree? Note the words not just in the stem. So the question is not asking you to choose. So agree with the discretion, agree with the direction, and refuse the exaggeration. Cognitive ability determines whether you can analyze the problem. Emotional skill determines whether you can work with the people who must implement the answer. In technical roles, the first dominates. In roles that run through other people, which is most of administration, the second increasingly does. But an officer with high emotional intelligence and poor analytical capacity is charming and wrong, and being liked to be substitute like this, and being liked is not a substitute for being right. So what is the honest closing position here? Neither neither is sufficient. The relative weight depends on the role, and the two are not in competition. The officer who can both analyze the problem and carry people through the solution is the one the service actually needs. Then where emotional intelligence actually operates. Five situations, and knowing them lets you illustrate any question in this unit instantly. Delivering bad news, where emotional intelligence actually operates, we are discussing. Delivering bad news. A rejected claim, a demolition notice, a death. The decision is made, only the manner is left, and the manner is what the person will remember about the state. Then managing hostile crowd, reading what the crowd actually wants, which is often acknowledgement before remedy, is the difference between de-escalation and firing. Then comes to receiving criticism, public, unfair, or from a subordinate. The test is whether the criticism is evaluated or the critic is. Then comes to leading a demoralized team after a failure, a transfer, or a public attack on the department. Then come to mediating between parties who each believe they are the wronged one, which is most of district administration. And the 2016 anger question fits here. Anger is not simply harmful, it signals that something has been violated, and an officer who never feels it may not be paying it attention. What is harmful is acting from it, manage it by naming the emotion, delaying the response, and separating the person from the conduct. And note that chronic anger is an office is usually symptoms of the institutions rather than the individual. Where emotional intelligence actually operates. This is the important thing. First one, five situations that let you illustrate any question in this instantly. So where emotional intelligence actually operates: delivering bad news, when dealing with a hostile crowd, when receiving criticism, with a demoralized team, between mediating two parties, and anger. So in these six situations. So comes to the Metis 2026 anchor, empathy built into administrative design. Heat action plans pioneered by Ahmedabad and since taken by up by another Indian cities. Deploy an empathy in administration or EI, emotional intelligence under operational stress. The plans work not because officials sympathized with heat deaths, but because they asked who is actually exposed. Outdoor workers, slum residents, the elderly living alone, and then designed warnings those people would receive and act on cooling spaces they could reach, and hospital readiness for the days that follow. Empathy converted into an operational protocol rather than a sentiment. The argument rests on the design logic, not on coverage. Do not quote a city count. The anchor loses nothing without one, and a stale number is the only way this can go wrong. And how UPSC has asked this: define and develop what emotional intelligence is, how it can be developed, and how it helps in taking ethical decisions. 2013, the main components and whether they can be learned. This question asked in 2020 comes to apply to administration part. In this, under this heading, few questions asked in 2017, 2021. What are the questions? How will you apply emotional intelligence in administrative practices? This question asked in 2017. What contributes to a positive attitude in an officer functioning under exams, extreme stress? This question asked in 2020. Inside an ethical conflict, the most important type, emotional intelligence in a crisis of conscience, critically examined. 2021 asked question, and in quotation or comparison form, emotional intelligence has making your emotions work for you instead of against you. This question asked in 2019. Anger management question 2016. Hatred as destructive of wisdom and conscience 2020. EQ against EQ is 2023 question. Hmm? And The frames this unit feeds that the quotation for 2019-2020 and the 2023 EQ against EQ stem, all of which arrives at statements to be examined, and the last of which turns entirely on reading the words, not just in the stem rather than on any content. Enumerate and justify for the 2020 components question, and design a measure for 2017 and for the developed or innate half of 2020, both of which ask how capability is to be built rather than what it is. Comes to revise this unit as a pair with unit 4. UPSC frequently sets attitude and emotional intelligence in the same part of the paper. Revise this unit as a pair with unit 4. Why? UPSC frequently sets attitude and emotional intelligence in the same part of the paper, and the distinction between them, disposition toward an object against a capability to manage emotion, itself examinable, and has not been set a distinguish has not yet been distinguished as set as a distinguished question. There is closing. What is the one line you have to carry? Intelligence helps you solve problems. Emotional intelligence helps you solve problems that involve people, which in public service is all of them. That closes the four conceptual blocks: ethics and the human interface, human values, attitude, emotional intelligence. Unit 6th to 9th supply the thinkers as lenses, the two heaviest blocks in public administration and probity, and international ethics. Units 10 to 12 are where all of it is finally tested: the engine, the archetypes, and the clock. Whichever order you meet them in, the frames from unit 1 are what operate on every one of them. With this, we concluded GS4 marathon with all 5 videos. We discussed 5 videos. In first video, we discussed second video, we discussed third video, we discussed case studies, fourth video we discussed, and fifth video discussed these ethics, etc. In third video we discussed property governance, etc. And first video we discussed second video we discussed international ethics, etc. And first video we discussed moral thinkers, lens, and reformers, etc. So with this, we concluded total 5 videos regarding to regarding or relating to UPSC GS4 mains paper ethics, as far as 2026 mains is concerned. Please go through these 5 videos and revise, and you get good marks in this examination. Thank you. All the best.